Okay.
You'll open it, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, and I want to welcome everybody to our fourth and final session of Decolonizing Education Workshop Series, Module 4, Facilitating a Circle of Learning. My name is Patricia McGiskin. I'm with the Special Education section of the Chiefs of Ontario, the Education Unit. So I want to do a land acknowledgement. I'm back in the city of Thunder Bay and also the Anishinaabe territory. And it includes the Ojibwe of the Fort William First Nation, a signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. Again, I also want to acknowledge there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the entire territory of Ontario. We are thankful and able to work and live in these territories. We are thankful to the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who have cared for these territories since time immemorial and who continue to strengthen Ontario and to all the communities across the province. I also want to acknowledge there are nations who have no signatories to any treaties, and then they are acknowledged as unceded territories. The Chiefs of Ontario is honored to work and collaborate with our brothers and sisters, clients, stakeholders, communities throughout the various territories. The Chiefs of Ontario would like to acknowledge that the head office is located in Toronto on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Anishinaabe, the Chippewas of the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat people, and now is the home to many diverse First Nations Inuit people. It is also, I also want to acknowledge that Toronto is covered by the Treaty Number 13, again, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty, and multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. I also want to identify that by acknowledging traditional First Nation territories is one way to recognize the contemporary and historical First Nation people presence in the land rights. It's a small step towards dismantling the continued impacts of colonialism and undoing the First Peoples removal in our everyday lives. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Cynthia Eskimo. Thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Patricia. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. It's we're just commenting how challenging sometimes webinars can be because they're not terribly interactive, but we do have some time at the end. We're probably together about 120 minutes, so quite a long time, and I'm not going to speak for that whole length of time. I'm going to keep it fairly short and then just have a dialogue at the end so that we get an opportunity to ask questions and share information, because I know that everybody that's joining us has done some incredible work, and we really, this is about how do we get all that work together in one space so that everybody has an opportunity to share in it. I can remember working with self-government for many, many years, and everybody's doing sort of their own thing. But when we started bringing people together into larger conferences, we got an opportunity to really see how much more we could do as a collective. So I think that that's one of the most important things that we'll do. We'll take a 5-minute break if necessary towards the end of my conversation, and then we'll move from there. So for those of you just joining us, my name is Cynthia Wesley Eskimo. I'm from the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation in Lake Simcoe. I was just there yesterday, and I'm now in Ottawa at my daughter's place because of some other information I have to do here in Ottawa. I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother. I'm married to a social worker who actually is going to be, has brought in some different kinds of conversation the last time we met, and he's actively working on some Indigenous focused work in the North. So there's lots happening everywhere. Education in the North is really being dramatically affected. In the South, we've got different kinds of conversations going, but equally as important and equally needing to have a lot of time and attention paid to them. But what we're learning especially after the evacuations in the north and down into the south, is that there's a lot of work that still has to happen, and people have to do their own work before they can really start that process of healing across all of the communities that we're very, fortunate, I think, to be able to work with. So that's one of the things I really kind of want to focus in a little bit more today. I've had to do the work. I've had to do the therapeutic stuff. I've had to be prepared. When I had children, they were the biggest mirror I ever encountered. Everything that I needed to have healed, they were mirroring it right back to me. And that's kind of what children do. Children show up in our world, and I've heard that phrase many times, that our children are born to heal us. And in so many fundamental ways, I can see that that's absolutely true. I'm also prepared through some of these conversations to bring some hard truths into the conversations. And sometimes I know that feels like I don't want to offend anybody, but I want to say what needs to be said. I think once I passed 60, it was like, I can say whatever the heck I want because it needs to be said. And when you're 30 and you're working in this field, or you're 40, it's a little harder to say the kinds of things that need to be said around hard conversations and some of the impacts from the past that are still resonating into the present. So if we want to truly cycle break in our nations, we have to have those conversations on addictions, and we have to be, really honest about it, because we've all lost people in our communities. And I still come back to the COO conference on healthcare, where one of the health director stood up and said 80% of the people in his community were addicted to opioids, and what he really wanted was a strategy. And at that conference, I was talking about really birthing children from preconception through pregnancy, post-conception through toddlerhood, and we have to sort of reconstitute children at the center of the circle because it's so important for them. I've been the chair for Truth and Reconciliation at Lakehead University for the last 7 years. I'm also the chair for the governing circle for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. So I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people about what's happening across our communities and what's happening in governance, and how do we bring those pieces together. And have a doctorate in cultural anthropology from the University of Toronto, and been really engaged in our communities as far back as when I was 16 years old. So 50 years ago, I joined the Ontario Women's Association, Native Women's Association, and started working from that level on, and moving around everywhere. But I want to talk a little bit first about what I really am always honing into, and that's my interest in my research and my teaching around historic trauma and unresolved grief and trauma in our populations. And I was just talking to my daughter yesterday. She's a director at the University of Ottawa. She was talking about trauma, teaching about it, and I said, I always tell people, 97% of the population has had some experience with trauma, and the other 3% are lying. We're all affected in various ways by trauma, whether it's about a family breakup, or whether it's about a sexual assault or something that happened, a parent dying, that affects us in some very fundamental ways, which we often carry into our adulthoods, and our lives are deeply affected by that, and how we see the world. Like, the lens has to be changed. So let me just start with a little bit of a conversation, but I'm going to share my screen and just talk a little bit about that, because it's some of the stuff that, and I know we're having conversations now, we're saying, well, how much of this is really important to us as people? How much do we really need to care about this past? And I think we haven't quite left it behind. There's a lot of things that we need to help people understand about that sort of feeling of dysfunction, displacement, all of those pieces. And my work really kind of looked at those events impacting multiple areas in our lives. Certainly the physical, with a lot of the epidemics that happened in the beginning. And, so I go back right to contact. Economically, when we're removed from territories and we're shoved into these, artificial communities called reserves, and we don't have territorial jurisdiction and authority anymore, something that we're all actively fighting for, the social cultural impacts of missionization and the governments taking over our decision-making capacity and putting Indian agents in our communities. And some of that still resonates. There's residue that comes forward. And psychologically, just sort of losing that ability to have a locus of control, our own personal ability to make decisions in some very fundamental areas. So we've moved, I think, a pretty significant way in the last 100 years, I'd say, but we're still not quite there. And then, of course, we're reconstituting today that whole question of spiritual practice, reconstituting our ceremonies. Our languages are coming back. U of T just put up a free language course for anybody that wants it. That initiated some complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Response. It just means that everybody was affected in some way. Not everybody the same, because we're all not the same. And those images got embedded in our social memories. So we had to deal with that for quite a long time. I think that we have been actually benefited by the question of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, going back to Phil Fontaine's conversation with Barbara Frum. The fact that there was these suppressed and distorted memories that are being passed the next generations through a lot of the addictions and a lot of the behavior of people that came out of residential schools directly. I was raised with two members who spent 20 years between them. And then that manifesting as symptoms of maladaptive social patterns, which they learned from somebody else outside of our communities, because that wasn't the way we were. When we go back and look at the past and we talk to our elders and we talk about the stories, we weren't doing the kinds of things that are happening today. That feeling of shame, that we're still kind of grappling with, and our young people are still feeling. Suicide, where we're still trying to get a handle on stopping this, especially in the North, where it happens more pervasively. Domestic violences, where I've actually had occasion to speak to people that I know that actually work in this field, and I keep saying, is it better? And they're like, no. So there's, we have the Moose Hide campaign. We have a lot of conversations going on around domestic violences. But I just was driving behind a bus yesterday, and it said a woman dies every 6 minutes in Canada from an intimate partner. A woman somewhere in Canada every 6 minutes dies at the hands of her intimate partner. And then the sexual abuse, which I raised because I first of all, personally had that experience, but also because I just think it's really important that we have those conversations and bring those things out in the light. I've had enough conversations with young women, young girls, and older women about it, that we need to just put it out there and do something about it and really speak to it. It's important. And then the neglect, and then those transmissions of those behaviors. But now we're in another space, in a growingly enlightened space. Our political processes are opening up. The social is opening up. We're engaged in so many different kinds of conversations in so many different places. Economically, we're doing way better in our communities. We know it takes money to make money. The treaties and the land claims that have been resolved have done some powerful work in our communities. Landing certain kinds of contracts has done that. Literary, we are writing books. We are telling our stories from our perspectives. Our kids don't have to read books about other people now. They can read books about their own people. And media, of course, we can talk about APTN and all the videos that are now being developed by people like Jennifer Podemsky and others. And educationally, we are doing a great job in this. We really are now focusing in with things like this webinar and a lot of the other places and programs we're going to talk about today. Those things are creating this spiritual awakening. And we see how powerful it is to take our children back to the drum, to take our children back to ceremony, because ceremony really helps to focus. It gives us something that we can actually be present for and with. And I think it's going to be very important to continue that. All kinds of political and cultural positive images are now being embedded in the social memory. Our kids are growing up without that shame, without that feeling that they aren't good enough. I think we're really shifting that cycle in a good way. These webinars, we've been talking about changing the kinds of language that we use when we look at our children who are struggling. Maybe they're on the spectrum, maybe they're affected by fetal alcohol. There's something that's there, maybe it's organic, but we don't want them to be regarded as so different. We want them to be able to be supported, obviously, and have the kinds of tools and resources that are necessary for them to do the best thing. But we want to celebrate not only the fact that they are learners, but that they are musicians and that they are artists, that they are dancers, that they bring skill sets to the community that are very valuable and very desirable. And we don't judge them by, did they manage to get an A, B, or a C? That's sort of things we want to push away. Diverse learners, they have everything that they need, and we have to deal with the needs that they have as people who have a right to be in our communities and do the kinds of things that work for them. So when we went through the TRC process, a lot of those suppressed and distorted memories got brought to light. A lot of that spiritual practice became more relevant to us. We started to really do a lot of different kinds of things that created that social efficacy. So now we're transmitting positive identities and behaviors. And I think that that's the most important thing that we're able to do over the next couple generations, that spiritual rejuvenation, cultural reclamation, the kinds of things that are going to make our nations really vibrate with health. That's what we're working towards. That's what we want to see happen. So I want to just talk a little bit about, for those of you that are just joining us, I want to talk about a little bit about what we've actually done to date. We started with webinar 1, and we really looked at the TRC calls to action and the 10 guiding principles. We also looked at the 13 calls to action for university presidents, because our kids, we want them to go to college and university, and we want to ensure that those places are welcoming environments for them when they get there. So I think we did a pretty good job of understanding that it's our push that has got us to these places. I always tell the universities and the presidents when I speak to them, we're not here because of you. We're here because we wanted to be here, and we wanted you to make the changes that were necessary to ensure that we not only came here, but we actually stayed here and we graduated. So that's kind of the kind of thing that's going on right now. Webinar 2 was designed to open a discussion on deconstructing and redefining the special in special education. I want to change those words to be more reflective of the children that we're actually working with. And we base that on, our own truth and reconciliation processes, what's going on in our communities and the changes that we're making in our spaces to accommodate the needs of our own children. And I think that that's an important consideration. We talk about wise practices, and wise practices are really about the reconstitution and rejuvenation of cultures and languages and economies after long periods of colonization and loss, stepping away from colonization. And I know we still have the Indian Act, hanging over our heads, but that can't really go away until we actually define an alternative, because that's kind of our connection between the past and the present and the resources that are necessary for our communities to continue to function. So we have to think about that. We discussed the linkages to the legacy of toxic stress and ethno stress related to historic intergenerational trauma and direct impacts on our holistic well-being. We know that colonization has played a significant role in placing a lot of our people in the places where they are. So we bring that conversation back into the community, back into the conversation today. I don't think that ever really goes away. It's something that, I hope at some point in the future, it will go away. We will not have to reference it as much as we have, but we can still see from a lot of places that we haven't quite got that foundation of change happening, and our attention has to go to where we ensure children have the very best start and families continue to get the supports that they need to thrive. So webinar 3, I focused on how do we meet our needs to revise those approaches for special or extraordinary children that I have been referring to as diverse learners, and rename and reframe how they can perceive themselves and how others might perceive them in the classroom. I talked about the organization called Teach for Canada. Teach for Canada is working with teachers from everywhere. They're certified teachers. They're not all Indigenous, although some of them are. But the goal is to teach teachers how to teach effectively in Indigenous classrooms. So we teach them some of the language. We also ensure that they are flexible, that they're flex teachers, that it's not like it's by the book or nothing. We want them to be flexible, and we want them to be comfortable going outside, because we're finding with children that the best place for them to do the learning that they need to do is outside in the open air. And I know that Six Nations, we talked a little bit about Six Nations program. Six Nations has designed a program that is entirely outside, and the only time the kids come inside is for lunch. So I think that those are really, really important elements for us to pay, some significant attention to. So we're building healthy communities. We're trying to create sustainable economic development. We're nation building. We're nation building right across the entire country. And that requires the time to examine our own ways. What are our own ways? How do we identify, so much has gone on under the bridge over the course of time with the interference from external agencies. And we want to determine the traditionally based or wise practice pathways and use those to go forward, not what the government of Canada says is supposed to be the thing that works for us. We have to do the work that determines that all over again. And it's going to be, I think in some instances, a little bit scary because we're going to be walking away from things that people think are going to be important and that we may not see as quite as important. So that's the, there's going to be still going to be interference by the Canadian state, I think, but we're going to try wise practices over best practices. And I say that because the wise practices are those things that are ours. I still remember a lot of elders at the Banff Center saying, I don't know why they're teaching us all this stuff. We have our own ways. We have our own ways. And best practices is the kinds of things that don't work in other places. Well, it worked over there. So it should work here and it should work over there. And we can just do the same thing everywhere. And it's like, I'm sorry, it doesn't work in the communities in which we live. So we have to start to think about changing that. These webinars, if anything, are about prompting the reconstitution of what Indigenous education was prior to the colonial attempt to kill the Indian and the child. We want to know from you and from your elders. We talked in last webinar about elders. What is it that worked in terms of learning that we set down because of the enforcement of colonial education in our schools? Way up in the north, where I did my doctoral work, there's nobody there except the community, and yet they're adhering so strongly to a curriculum that doesn't actually meet the needs or the understandings, really, or the interests of the kids that are in that community. So I started adapting the curriculum to accommodate the kids that were in the community. So when we talked about migration, rather than talking about migration in Europe, we talked about migration from Big Trout Lake to Muskrat Dam to other communities when resources got short, or when the population grew too big in one territory and they needed to move. And adapting the education to accommodate that made a huge difference. The kids wanted to come to school, they wanted to learn, they wanted to be a part of that because we were talking about them and their lives and their future. So I think that that's something that we just have to take back. And I know that as we start to create the legislation or whatever mechanisms we're going to use to help kids have the educations that they need, that there will be resistance on the part of Ontario, who actually sets up the curriculum. But I think we just have, it's just keep pushing in that same direction so that we can get to that place. It also means, I think, taking on some very sensitive and challenging conversations, the impacts of still continuing impacts of residential schools, child welfare for sure, because we have far too many kids still in care, sexual, physical violences, and asking everyone to become a part of this very difficult and sensitive conversation and accepting that nobody gets to do this alone. It's way too much work and it's really too hard to do. We have amazing principals in your schools that are moving forward to try to create the kinds of conversations that will help those kids come out of that and be in a good way. But I think requires the influence of the elders in your communities. It requires the influence of the mothers and fathers and professionals who can come into the community and can help to guide those conversations. It's a tough one. And I've carried so many stories from so many people in the communities that I've been in that don't seem to be able to get to that inner work and that deep healing, because it's one of those things that we want to do this with, like, including my own mother. When I tried to talk to my own mother about it, she was like, I don't know anything about that. And, and then finally I had to write her a letter and say, like, this is the way it is, stuff that's been there. So we talked, we're still talking about community-driven education and teaching, and we need to each of you. We talked about the value of the elders and the strengths-based wise practices in learning. And we really want to go strengths-based when we talk about the experiences that we're having. This is not about deficit in our communities. This is not about the people struggling only. It is about, those struggles are meaningful. Those struggles are about getting somewhere. So we need to look at that 7 generations back, and the courage and the strength and the wherewithal to get us to the place where we are today. The young people and the adults that have done some tremendous work moving this entire mountain, and where are we going into the future, and how will we do it, and who's going to be involved. So we talked about referencing the 7 teachings as well that come out of that, from the courage and the respect, humility, truth, honesty, love, and wisdom. We talked about, embedding those in the planning that we're doing and understand. I mean, I teach those in a lot of places. Last time we had 2 elders join us, Jeanette Corbier-Laval, a woman who has dedicated her life to learning, teaching, supporting, working hard to ensure Indigenous people live into their strengths. She challenged the government when it came to her rights as a woman and her rights as a grandmother. And she's not the only one. Many of us have challenged to ensure that we got to the places where we are, and that we maintain the integrity of our nations. We were also joined by Steve Copty. He shared a story about education and his return to university at 50 years of age, and he ultimately earned 2 master's degrees. So, his message was, it's never too late to go back to school to get the information that you need to do the kind of work that you want to do. He shared some thoughts on education and the stuff that he's seeing happening in the far north. I mean, we're Coos kind of in the mid north to the far north, but there's still this is a big country, and this is a huge province, and there's lots going on. And he wants to get kids to return to classes. This is a really important part of this conversation. We talked about the pandemic and its effects on educational experiences. And then we were joined by Amos Key from Six Nations, who offered the closing prayer, reminding us that we still have a lot of work to do. And he talked a little bit about the Pope, because we had mentioned that the Pope had, we had used the word rescinded, but actually it is refuted. And I listened to a webinar yesterday myself on the doctrine of discovery. And it's quite a debate happening between the Catholic Church and the other churches on whether this is something that is meaningful, that we should be paying more attention to, or whether it's not important. The Catholic Church basically said, the Pope has refuted the doctrine of discovery many, many times in the past, maybe not publicly, but has said if we should, that the Indigenous populations of Canada have rights, and we should recognize that. But it is that helpful if we don't know that he's talking about it. So there's lots of conversations about that. So we're trying to reference our desires to address the challenges of bringing parents, caregivers, grandparents, and respected elders and seniors into our schools. They need to come into the classroom so we have access to their knowledge. And then the question becomes a redefinition of the purpose of education. What are we educating our kids for? And again, not only talking now about our diverse learners, but for everyone. We need to clarify educational roles as we move forward to the reclamation of languages, cultures, educational and governance systems. We need to asset map our communities for the gifts of every individual and get them to bring them forward. And when I say asset map, what I'm talking about is actually, because the work has to happen in the community, it can't happen. We're having a conversation through a webinar, but it has to happen in the community. And everybody that has something, and everybody has something, needs to be brought into this conversation, and their wisdom, their education, their thoughts, a part of moving this forward. It takes everybody. So today, we're closing this series with addressing those challenges of bringing parents and caregivers into the classrooms. We've discussed the need to facilitate circles of learning that include truth and the restoration of educational jurisdictions and authorities and rights through dialogue. Are we ready to ask ourselves if we're willing to come down hard on the question of internal reconciliation through absolute recognition and support of our children and what we know they need as a nation, as we rebuild our nations, and not focusing on what the province wants or what the federal government wants, but what do we absolutely need? So it's about asking everyone to participate in critically defining the purpose of education from an Indigenous perspective. I have asked many times over the years, why are you educating your children? What is it that you're hoping for? And are you educating your kids so that they are going to stay in the community and become a member and a part of that community and nation build in the community? Are you educating them so that they are going to leave the community and they're going to go out into the world and be, in a corporation or in a system, another system? Why, what are we doing? And can we create the trajectory for our children, like we used to do again, going back into, 7 generations back or further, maybe. We knew when we watched our children what their strengths were as they were growing up, and we kind of directed them into the kinds of places where they would be most effective. Are we going to come back to doing that? Or do they get that generalized education that they're getting through the curriculum that Ontario has put before us? So we have to assess all kinds of questions, the school boards and how they're run, or whether do we have enough people on the school boards? Could we have put more school boards together that are more Indigenous led? And as I understand that is happening, but how much more quickly can we do that? And then we want to speak to the needs to clarify roles and responsibilities as we continue to move forward, and who really needs to be a part of this conversation. Instituting training for our members to run their own school boards, curriculum. I know that there was resources for curriculum prior to Doug Ford coming into office, and that he shut it all down basically and said, we're not doing that anymore. But I do know that many communities across the country have actually said, we're going to do it anyway. And then finally, we've had that conversation around Every Child Matters. That is still a very big going concern. There's certainly a lot going on coming up to September on this particular question, and Orange Shirt Day and all that. But again, I'm asking you to ask yourselves, and I ask myself every day, what matters to every child? What matters to every child as we move forward? So, does community-driven education, teaching and learning, what does it mean? And how do we actually put it in place? So I think those are really important parts of the conversation. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that trauma piece as we move forward. I'm going to go on to the other slides, and also just talking about some of the things that we have to recognize before we go. And we have to sort of, we have to pick up, we have to lift this and deal with it head on so that we can move on to other kinds of things. So that's what I really wanted to talk about. Because I see it happening. It's happening because of the pandemic. It's happening because with the pandemic, a lot of the kids that would have normally been able to go to school and be safe. And when I say safe, there was a lot of tensions across everywhere when people were isolated and locked away in their homes and other situations. And I think it's really important that we understand that, that whole idea of fight, flight, fright, and or appease is the other one that I put in there, because they don't, it creates this really untenable stress fight in their brain. They can't deal with the kinds of things that are going to be important, like going back to school and functioning, because they can't focus. There's too much going on behind them and in the households where they are. So that has to be sort of ironed out. We saw quite a bit of stress and tension, I think, being released when the North was evacuated down to the South and into Niagara Falls. But there was a lot of drinking and a lot of fighting going on for at least 4 days before people started to settle down and relax into the fact that they had been moved to another place. And the kids were very much affected by that as well. So there's this constant stream of stress coming at them, and they do fall behind in school or fail to develop healthy relationships because of what's happening around them. So there's this real need to focus in on these kids who are in school right now, especially the ones that are diverse learners, and try to get reconstitute that trust, bringing them back together again and helping them really relax again into their world and into the educational systems, but in a kind of a different way. A lot of schools have implemented things like meditation, or going back to, even if they're in grade 4 or 5, going back to that mid-afternoon nap, or putting in the classroom small tents, small dark tents, so that kids can actually slip into that tent to find a few minutes of respite. So they're still in the classroom, they can still hear what's going on, they can still hear the teacher talking, but they're not sitting in they're not sort of trying to refocus their mind and lots is going on in there. They're actually giving them an opportunity to do a little bit of calming down. I still remember being up in the north when there was a couple suicides, and the kids could not sleep. They were so tense and scared. And when I spoke to them at that point, it was more about, their fear of a suicide spirit. And they said, when we fall asleep, we dream, and then they come and tell us to come with them. And so they refuse to sleep. So after 3 days of non-sleep, they're getting very psychotic, because we need to sleep and we need to dream in good ways to be able to be healthy. So I had to sit with a lot of kids and actually hold my hands on their back and teach them how to, like, tense, release all through their body, so that they would fall asleep. And then I would just stay there in the room with them while they slept, just teaching them that there are ways for you to move this disorder in your brain and in your body, and let it go, so that you can actually relax and sleep and rebuild that. And then with all of that, we have to understand why people find solace in eating too much, or in sugar, and in alcohol, tobacco, methamphetamines, inappropriate sexual behaviors, especially when they're far too young, high risk sports or activities, work, overachievement. Although for those of us that took on overachievement or workaholism, we get rewarded for that, but it's still a dysfunction. It still means that I have to work with a autoimmune disorder, because I can't, because of my own toxic stress as a kid has not, I've resolved it mostly, but it's still present. So we have to learn, and I have to always learn how to new coping mechanisms to help myself. So those are solutions. And so we have to be cognizant that a lot of our children are carrying these things right now, because of what has happened in the very near past, and they don't necessarily know how to move that. And there's a lot of fear in a lot of people. And of course, we live in an era that I think is quite, there's a lot of incivility. So I think that's something that we really need to think about as well. So I kind of say, fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And the reason I put the appease there is because I have seen in our communities in particular, and in women especially, yes, we can get into fight. Sometimes we run away. Sometimes we just freeze and we don't know what to do. But sometimes we appease. Sometimes it's like, okay. I'll do what you say. Or, in a relationship, it can get violent, and then it's our fault. It's like, oh, it's something I said, or I should keep my mouth shut, or all those things. There's a lot of things that are going on, or kids that just go silent because they just don't have the words. They have the big emotions, but they don't have the kinds of words that are necessary to express what they're feeling, and to express what they're seeing, and express what they need. So I think those are really, really important. This idea of this system flooding our bodies with tension, with stress, with adrenaline, cortisols, and then you can't think. And of course, if you're being chased by a bear, that makes a lot of good sense. You just need to move. But what happens when the bear comes home from the bar every night? What happens when there's a lot of drinking going on in a household, or there's a lot of domestic violence? What does that do to the brains of a child who's trying to deal with this? And, I tell people quite often, when you're in a household and there's a lot of conflict in the household, and you see a little guy sitting in the corner playing with his train, and you think, oh, what a good kid. He's so good. All this stuff is going on, and he's sitting in the corner behaving himself. That is not a child that is well behaved. It is, but that's also a child that is shut down. They've said it's safer to just disappear and disassociate, so that I don't have to deal with what's going on. But then that's a real challenge for them when they get to school. Because when they feel more stress coming up that they haven't had the words for, or the ability to resolve, that comes right back up again. And now you've got a child that's disassociating in your classroom, or is not able to focus on the work that you're putting in front of them, because there's too much going on in their brain. So we almost have to spend a good portion of our morning with our kids in these situations, and spend a lot of time doing either an exercise that helps them move some energy, or we have to spend some time having them meditate and working with them to calm them, so that when they walk into the classroom after that half hour or hour, whatever time we can dedicate to it, you've got a child that can now focus better. and is going to come back the next day ready to do something different, because that's what's going to be in the way of giving kids that have needs of the appropriate kind of an opportunity to learn and do the education. So that's the kind of things that I think are really important for us to be aware of as we move forward. And that's the kinds of things that are going to reignite what I would say is the education process in our communities. It doesn't happen otherwise without all of that kind of an opportunity. So again, it means that it's kind of on us as adults and as educators to prevent adverse childhood experiences. And at the same time, as we're changing our systems, and these are the larger systems, obviously the educational and the criminal justice systems and healthcare, mental health and public health, all those things. But we also have to change the systems in the schools that we have access to. I mean, a good example for me was Christian Island when I was much younger and working on research. We went to Christian Island for a visit, and I can't remember what it was about anymore. It was so long ago, but I remember going into the primary school and saying to myself, and actually to the teachers, this school could be anywhere. Like, there is nothing in this school that says that this is a First Nations territorial school. There's no pictures of any elders. There's no murals on the wall. There's nothing Indigenous in this school. It's just a school. Now you go to that school. I've been in the school subsequent to that, and there's beautiful murals on the wall. The language is being taught. I mean, and so this is like 30 years ago. It has changed quite dramatically since then. We have to change those systems. So when kids walk into those schools, they're like, yes, I know that this is my school, and I'm going to get here what I need. So this is really important. So we can't do one. We can't prevent adverse childhood experiences if we don't do the other. We have to make sure we change those systems, and we have to address the needs of our families, our entire family. If there's domestic violence, is there something happening? We need to be able to step into that as a community. I don't expect an individual to go and actually create the kinds of changes that I'm talking about. It's just not going to happen. So whether we're talking about intergenerational trauma transmission, contemporary traumas, which of course happen on a regular basis, or ACEs, which I now know affect everyone. I think I've shown you slides of right across the country, and how much ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, are a part of our everyday experience. And I really wonder how much of that is happening in the United States as well, now that they're on their 230th mass shooting since January. There's a lot going on, and hurt people. So how much of what's happening in our households is affecting the health and mental health and well-being of those children who are growing up into teenagers, angry teenagers, who are then becoming angry adults? We have to really start thinking about that, and those effects that they have on our ability to be the people that we are, and the people that we were. We have our own ways to be the people that we want to be into the future, and to guide our children in that particular way. So it's a big story. This is an important slide. Again, it's a very recent slide. It's 2020, and we know that there are a lot of issues that need to be resolved. We have to look at what's happening, and this new record of deaths of despair is an important one. It's like people just are not being able to find their way through a lot of the kinds of things that are happening. I think for us, as we've embarked on a reconciliation process at the community level, we've actually been able to do some really powerful work in our communities and in our schools. We've been able to really help our kids do much better. We're 2 generations out, well, actually 3 now, of the residential school experience. My parents went. I was intergenerationally affected by their experience directly. my daughter was affected by my experience somewhat directly, but I did it differently because I mean, I just saw what had happened to me. And her daughter is again living in a kind of a different experience again. So I think we've done that, and we're going to be able to keep moving that in the right direction. But we do have this conversation happening around drugs. I have lost family members. I'm sure each one of you has either known someone or has lost a family member to the same situation. We have lots to think about. It is not going away. And deaths of despair is about all those things. It's about falling into systemic disorders and heart diseases and addictions and systemic disorders like diabetes. We have to start thinking about that. We want to be a healthier people. And the way to do that is to really acknowledge and work with the kinds of circumstances that we're seeing. Okay, so I want to go back to this other part of the conversation. So I have been working on a lot of different kinds of questions. It's, I've been talking about this return to the original instructions, recognition that a lot of the knowledge has to be reconstituted and brought forward for our young people. I recall looking at a lot of the work that Koo has done, a lot of your reports, and I can see that young people and elders or adults want the same thing. They want a much stronger return to the teachings. They want to, it doesn't mean, that they want to join, they may not want to join the Medewan society. Like they may not want to go that far, but they want to have a stronger sense of who they have been and who they are and who they will be into the future. A conversation, in a lot of communities, and even like my own community, there's a lot of Christianity. There's there's not a lot of knowledge about the past or the history. So I think that's important. We long ago acknowledged sleeping elders. We acknowledged that a lot of our people had gone directly through the residential school system and did not have a lot of that knowledge. And that now there's more of a reconstitution of that. Our young people are incredibly interested in making this happen. I also have community members who choose not to share their knowledge because of resignation. They just feel like there's no point. Religion, of course, as I've said, or because they feel like they're not being heard. And so I guess the question is, are we listening? And if we're listening, what can we do? Can we canvass our entire nation to bring forward knowledge and start collecting it, like just harvesting across the entire community? I have talked to elders on Manitoulin over the years who have said, well, yeah, I know lots of things, but nobody ever asks me. And I'm like, well, why don't you just tell? And they're like, well, who am I going to tell it to? So there's this sort of little breach, like I have information, nobody's asked me for it, and I'm not telling anybody about it. So I'm trying to pull that back. And it can't be done by a few people. It needs to be, maybe it's a job for our youth to just, go out and hold those interviews on a regular basis and just do it as a knock, knock, knock. I'm visiting you. I'm bringing you tea, or I'm bringing you tobacco. And I'd really like to be able to have a conversation with you about what's happening. Because we all know that past division, anger, hurt has been generated over like 500 years of that or more. And it's, we want to mourn it. We want to talk about it. We want to teach it. We want to mourn it. And we want to get back on track with all of that traditional knowledge that I know we still have and teach to, that should be our curriculum. So, talked a little bit about the deaths of despair and all of the pieces. We also need to learn how to fight for making room in our schools for the kinds of teachings that are necessary. So I know in the North, they agreed to put in a couple weeks of time for kids that go goose hunting with their parents. The goose, I was saying the geese come at a certain time. You can't say, well, maybe they can do that next month. The geese come when they come. Is when the geese are arriving, people leave leave the territory or leave their schools in their First Nations, and they go out and they hunt. And then now the schools have said, okay, we'll freeze that learning phase for those kids. So when they come back in, they haven't lost any time in whatever curriculum that they might have been missing if they hadn't stopped. So that's important. Prophecies, the teaching of the creation stories that we sort of set aside, those creation stories are important, and the prophecies are important, and they need to be taught to people in the community so they have a better sense of what that's about. That knowledge exchange is really important, and not leaving education to just the educators, but pulling people in the community into this conversation. We had elders teas in Georgina, where all the elders would be given a table and the kids revolved around the tables, and I got to have a story from each of the elders that was present. So that seemed to work really well. We're talking about food sovereignty again, reconnections to the land, not only for food acquisition, but all knowledges. So my grandfather was very good about teaching me how to read the trees. The birds were an important part of that story. The winds, and when the winds blew and what the winds meant and where they were going. Those tales of the external world were part of the education, and the water and how the water flows and what happens to it and what needs to happen to it for it to be healthy. Stories of the animals in the territory where we lived, so that we knew who the animals were and what they brought to it. And if you take out one kind of animal, what happens to the rest? Everything is connected. So when you take out something, everything suffers. And most kids don't actually know that either. And there's been a lot of species that have been dying. Living on lands that, free of white flour, white alcohol, junk foods, drinks full of sugar, all of those things that are creating high levels of diabetes in our communities and other systemic disorders. Challenging conversations. It's always going to be, how do we do this? How do we take away some of those things? We take them away by replacing them with others. So rather than buying chips, we make our chips, or we figure out another way that's crunchy, that's going to give them the satisfaction, popcorn, things like that, and how we make that happen. And then the whole question of stopping and celebrating every bit of effort that we've made moving ourselves forward, because there's a lot of people that are burning out. I hear a lot of that. I'm so burnt out. I mean, I'm the only person doing this, or there's only 3 of us doing this, and we're burnt out, and we got to quit. And it's like, please don't quit. How do we help the people that are being your best people, that are moving stuff forward and need to be supported, so we don't just keep burning them out and finding new people that we have to train, but actually put those people that are burning out into a position of maybe of mentorship for a year or so that they can take their knowledge and transmit it, but are still working and having stuff get done, but not solely by themselves. And then addressing those unaddressed traumas that they have as we move forward, being gentle with each other and supporting all the efforts. So I was sharing with you that slide by Gabor Mate. I think that's another really important slide. He actually, his book, the myth of normal is an important one too. But he talks about, these 5 compassions. And I thought, this is a really important piece. We have to reconstitute compassion in our communities. There's been so much division created by external forces. And I think we really need to come back to this ordinary compassion, where we just, we experience another's pain or not, depending on where we're from, but it just means that we have the ability to be with suffering and are moved by it, that we understand that there's a lot of suffering in our communities still. And whether it's a matter of intergenerational trauma, or whether it's a matter of contemporary trauma or domestic violence or whatever it is, that we need to be moved by that. We have to find the 7 teachings, and with compassion, the compassion of curiosity and understanding. Everything exists for a reason, and the reason matters. So, we know that things, so it's not like what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. What happened to you that you feel you need to be violent, or that you're dropping out of school, or that you can't form a relationship that's lasting, or that your kids don't want to talk to you anymore? What's that? What happened? And how do we help you move through that and support you through that initiative and then that relearning? The compassion of recognition. I can see myself in others. I can see that I have flaws and struggles, and so do they. I remember the story of an elder who said that, oops, I don't think I lost. What happened there? Can you see that? Okay, just a second. Let me stop that share. Let me go back to that. For some reason, it set up a whole other, I don't know why I did that. Okay. Anyway, he talked about how, he was, very serious alcoholic. And that one day he was walking downtown to go panhandle some more money so he could get another bottle. And as he was walking, he saw people and he could see their pain. He could see everything about them and everything that hurt. And you know, as he walked along and kept seeing that, he said he finally realized how selfish he was being when he thought he was the only one that had pain. He was the only one that had been hurt. And he said, that was the day I put down the bottle. And that was the day I started to recognize that, you know, that we all have hurt. And that was the day that he decided to work towards becoming an elder, which he is today. We have to see ourselves and others and understand that we all have hurt. And the compassion of truth. Pain's not the enemy. It alerts us that something's happening, something needs to be addressed, and that we need to feel the pain to be able to heal the pain. We can't push it aside or pretend that it's not there or drink it away or, you know, whatever it is that we're doing, you know, we have, or eat it away. We have to actually understand that there's pain for good reason and it needs to be addressed immediately so that we can actually move forward in a better way. And then the pain of possibility, that there's more to us than what we present to the world, that there's so much about us that is so amazing and so wonderful. And we need to be able to take that into consideration and move forward from that perspective. So, okay, so there's lots of things that there's so many things to talk about, but I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe some of the shifts from this, you know, we need to move from the deficit models that we've been handed to the dependable strengths models that we know all of the strengths that we have, we bring those forward, we lift those so that we can help move out of this Indian Act and other kinds of places and into a much better place. So I went through some of the literature and looked at some of the teaching behavioral expectations, like all of the things that are going on across the country, adopting school-wide approaches, recognizing positive behaviors, like changing moving from a punitive, you must behave, go sit in the corner model to recognizing that, like focusing on those positive behaviors and building up those so that kids, we can break down that self-doubt and that hopelessness, the fear that I was talking about, the barriers against trust that have been developed over the course of time, especially over this last experience with the pandemic and not being able to be in a place with their own peer groups. Those kinds of things are important. There's lots of things that are happening across the board that I think are useful. And I put the links into the text, and when she posts the text, you'll be able to see that. But they talked about some of the things that they needed to do. And teacher candidates have identified some of those connections that were made on multiple levels when they shifted their perspective in the classrooms, within themselves, when they shifted their own perspective about who Indigenous peoples were and who they were. They said they felt much more whole. They felt more at peace and centered and calmer. And the more whole they felt, the better able they were to teach their students. The more they dealt with their own stuff, the better they were able to relate to their students. When they worked with the land and an environment, that image of Mother Earth, the image of the Turtle Island, all of those things deepen their respect and love for the planet. And it made it possible for them to teach, again, reach their students out and get their students engaged in that conversation. With the teaching and learning groups that they established, they had a better ability to create new relationships across the school forum instead of just working going into their own classroom and working effectively. I imagine in their own classrooms, creating those relationships with other teachers meant that they were able to draw on other kinds of skill sets and bring that back into their classroom and maintain that, and it helped them a lot in their teaching practices. The teachings that they learned from the elders in their communities and other people external to the classroom help them develop better character initiatives. They started to really understand curriculum in action, the depth of the community, the acceptance of learning, the affirmation of no shame, principles which carry the teachers forward, and it helped to reflect back to the students. With the Indigenous culture and learning from Indigenous culture, it said, a lot of teachers said before they did that, they didn't realize how incredibly deep and rich Indigenous culture actually is. So that was an important learning for them. There's a bunch of resources that I put in, exploring possibilities for including Indigenous curriculum, Indigenous content in the curriculum as well. Various school boards in Ontario are starting to put into place different kinds of curriculum levels that are saying, this is how you do it. So you don't even have to try to figure that out on your own. The Chiefs of Ontario obviously has a great deal of work on that. And I was looking at some of the amazing stuff that you have already listed. The friendship centers, the Ontario Friendship Centers are developing curriculum. Indigenous leads at various Ontario school boards are working on that. The Métis Nation of Ontario has developed a lot of work as well. The Inuit of Ontario, because we have a lot of Inuit people in Ontario that have come down from the north, and many are living in Ottawa, actually, where I am. Indigenous publications from kindergarten to post-secondary. Goodminds.com in Six Nations has an incredible amount of diverse materials that are really useful from K to really to post-secondary. And Indigenous in Northern Affairs Canada has been working very diligently on developing materials as well. So I've included a number of different kinds of resources for you. I've looked at some of the statistics. 66% of elementary and 80% of secondary schools offer Indigenous education opportunities today. That's language programs, guest speakers, professional development for teachers. And that's an increase since 2013, when it was about 49% to 61%. So we can see your work is actually having a tremendous effect right across the board. So it means that we still have to hold the external agencies and government accountable. It means, just because we're doing this great work doesn't mean that they get off the hook. It means that we have to ensure that our work is happening in our communities, our ideas, our framing of the questions, our implementation of jurisdiction authorities is strong, that's strengths-based, but that they're also still in the space where they're being held accountable. Because even though we've acknowledged for a long time that they're not coming to save us, because they never have, I know today more strongly than I ever did that it is our responsibility. Those words, responsibility, discipline, interpretation, are all ours to really activate, because for too long, we relied on external agencies to make that happen. So that's the dynamic that I think we're talking about actually implementing and moving forward. It requires the restoration of the kinds of discipline that made it possible for our elders to survive for many millennia on lands, and of course their wisdom as they were moving forward. So, our kids are counting us to build healthy communities, relevant education systems to meet their needs and futures, and to ensure they're free of trauma, both intergenerational and contemporary. And we have to congratulate all of those parents and grandparents who've worked hard at cycle breaking. I've been hearing cycle breaking all my life, and extending our care and love to those who are still struggling with grief, trauma, and support the healing that they need. So those are the kinds of pieces that I think are really becoming an important part of our consideration. I just want to share, Martin Brokenleg also did some really important, Martin Brokenleg also did some really important work over the course of time. And he actually worked with, he thought, one of the things that he felt was the most important thing that we could do for anybody was to create a sense of belonging. Kids want to belong. People want to belong. They want to belong to a family. They want to know that wherever they go, somebody's going to be welcoming them in. There's a sense of mastery that's needed for young people. They have to have a sense of mastery, not over everybody else, but they need to feel that they've done something that makes them the special person that they are. The independence, so that they can grow. There's boundaries, but they know that they have the right to choose. They have they can make a decision, and it's going to be respected. And of course, the question of generosity in our communities is a given. The whole question of reciprocity, that they can give away something away, and it's not going to break them. And I know our people still have that sense. It's not like, the capitalism has overcome all of our communities. It hasn't. We still understand that we have to share, and that we have to exchange, and that we have to ensure people have what they need. So those are that's the pieces that he talked about, that steps to, belonging means be related somehow to everybody, and act like it too, right? I've heard people say, she acts like she doesn't have any relatives, but making sure that we actually make sure that we're nourishing the next generation as we move forward, that we build competence in our students, especially our diverse learners, so that they feel welcomed in our community and know that they have a role to play. It's not to be superior, it's to be helpful to the community itself. That independence is about, respect, building inner respect and teaching discipline in our kids so that they understand that there are rules and there are boundaries in our communities that they need to work with, and that they have choices without being coerced, that we're not trying to force them into anything. We want them to make those decisions about what they're doing in their own way. And then that one generosity, you should be able to give away your most cherished possessions without your heart beating faster. That it's not about stuff, it's about humanity. It's about the inner work, who you are as an individual. That's the most important thing about this world in which we're living. And finally, just this, we're bringing back the trickster. The trickster is teaching us again about conscientiousness and teaching us about the world as we live in it and what we need to know. And I've said, other writers have said, Indigenous worldview is a source we now urgently need. The stuff that we do, the stuff that we teach, who we are is an important part for everyone, whether you're an Indigenous person or not. It would bring us back to a good space. So we talked about this before, and I'll just close at that. We do the community-wide data collection on all of the work that we've done over the course of time. We synthesize, we identify, we share, and we make sure that people are understanding. We help each other. And the participatory action research means that, we develop those strategies. We use that to help to move us forward with a strategy that's going to be helpful and is going to include children. And then we actually share that knowledge and work together to make sure it happens. So lots of really important work is available to you on an ongoing basis as we move forward. We are going to build nations. We have to do the work ourselves. Nobody's coming to do it for us. And we are way better equipped today to do that and make sure that it happens. So, okay, I'll leave it at that. And so thank you so much. You guys have been great. I appreciate your patience. And so I'll hand it back to Patricia, trying to stay in that hour. and we'll move from there. Thanks, Patricia.
Wow, I really enjoyed that piece. There was mention of a 5-minute break before we start our questions. If we can have a 5-minute break, I'll put the clock on and we'll keep going.
Hey there.
All right. Okay, so this brings us to the question portion of our presentation. I believe Marnie had a question. Marnie, are you there?
Good morning. Hi, Cynthia.
Hey.
Marnie Yurchuk, North Shore Tribal Council. I was just curious when you were talking about historical trauma and the impacts to families and that fight flight response. I guess my question is, what happens or what strategies can we use when children experience bullying? So it may not be internal, like internal family, but external school environment.
Well, usually there's something behind all that. I mean, kids don't become bullies unless there's something happening for them, right? It's not what's wrong with you, it's what happens, what's happening to you. One of the things I was thinking, that it should not be punitive in any way. What about if you took that kid, the bully, and you had an opportunity to do a little, like kind of like a circle debrief kind of thing, but not about a conversation, but about children picking a child and talking about what's wonderful about that child. So you might not start with the bully, but you might start with a couple other kids, and then the bully becomes one of those kids, where the other kids get to say, something nice, and of course you encourage that too. Something nice about that kid. Like that kid bullies are kids that are angry. There's something happening in their lives that are pushing them to be angry. So the kid that's getting bullied, same thing, right? There's a they're disassociating, or they're somehow feeling that they don't belong. And so they stick out, right? They're too quiet, or they don't dress. They maybe not dressed as well as the other kids, or there's something about that child. And I think, that equalizing, that equity process is what's going to be important here, making that kid, looking at each of those children and finding a way to lift each one of them so that everybody understands the gifts that they have. Because if you punish, right, that's just going to make it worse, really. It doesn't help. It's never helped in the history of education. Punishing the bully has never worked. And lifting that other child actually does. And those conversations that you have in classrooms around, without, like, telling stories about those kinds of things happening, without, it's not about anybody in the classroom. You're just telling a story about, kids getting bullied or being bullies, is really helpful as well, because they hear it from another perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard. I know. I was bullied when I was a kid too. I was the only Native kid in the school, so I had to do a lot of fighting. got beat up a lot, because that's, again, they didn't understand who are Native people. And, in the end, I ended up quitting school at 16 because of that. So, but the teachers didn't really know in those days, I don't think, how to manage that kind of an experience, because there weren't a lot of Native people. Well, they were starting to come into the cities from residential schools, but there weren't that many.
That's right.
Yeah.
Our next question, Cheryl King Zuick.
Good morning. Sorry for my voice. I'm just getting over COVID right now, but it's not really of a question. It's more of a comment. As we were having, I'm the education counselor for Gull Bay First Nation. We don't have a school in our community yet. Our children have to drive 45 minutes north on a bus to go to school up in Armstrong. But we were having a lot of cyberbullying with the girls on Snapchat and Instagram and all that. To the point where we actually had to get the police involved. But now what we're doing is we're having what's called girl talk. And once a month, we have the girls leave the classroom. We have one of the constables from OPP that all the children know and are familiar with. And since we have started this girl talk, there has not been any more incidents of the online bullying. So it just might be an idea for Marnie.
Was it the girls bullying each other?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think grade 6, 7, 8, right?
Oh, yeah.
Girls were terrible when we're that age, and it's usually over a boy or something. But it was getting nasty, and it was getting, where they were telling girls to kill themselves and stuff like that. But this girl talk has really helped. It's a safe space. We have the talking feather. Everybody takes their turn, and it seems to be really working.
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, Marnie, if they're really young, that's a little bit harder to do. But that's why I was thinking using a kind of a circle or a way that kids at that age, like it has to be age directed, right? But if they could have a conversation and maybe they're holding a stone or something and they have, and they're asked to say something nice, like something good. And then it goes to the next person. So everybody has an opportunity to say something nice, and maybe it's nice about themselves. Maybe it's nice about, somebody else in the room, like my friend. But as long as it's, you encourage them. It's like when we have circles where we actually do like things like sentencing circles or those kinds of circles. We ask, nothing starts without good first. So even if this person's done something that it needs to be restored, we say, I love, I really like this young man. He's always so attentive in class. So, and then you say, I don't understand why this happened. And but I feel badly that it did because I've always liked you so much. And then it goes on to the next person, right? So you're not just saying you're a bad kid and, we don't like you. It's like, how do we bring you back into the circle and help you understand you belong here? Everybody belongs in the circle. Everybody's different. So there's ways to bring kids into that conversation. I think that's a great idea and police officers, when I at Lakehead and Thunder Bay, because the kids just by university, they don't like police officers. They talk about the pigs, the cops. And so we have Indigenous police officers. So I would ask them to come into the classroom for the access program in their civvies. Just come as a person and talk to them about who you are. You have a pet dog, you have kids, whatever, and then leave. And then you're coming back next week in full uniform. So they know you first as a human being, as a man, and then they know you as a police officer, and give them your card and you tell them if they have any kind of problem or need that they can call you. Right? They know you now. So, but if they come in first as a police officer, it's like, oh, it's a cop. So we have to find ways to get young people to change their, sort of reframe their opinions of each other. And yeah, so that's a great idea. Boys could use that too sometimes, I think. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Marnie.
Thank you for those recommendations and suggestions on, the talking circles. I'm not involved because the student goes specifically to the provincial school board and is experiencing all kinds of bullying. But when we even talk about the teachers or talk about the principal, it seems that the principal is also one of those bullies, in the fact that you could see when you talk to the student, because of all the negative encounters, that just talking outside of a school setting, that the child, his emotions are here, and then they get so worked up and angry just talking about the principal or what's happening. So I'm just looking at supportive ways that we could assist not only the child, but even for that school setting, because they're just getting kicked out on a regular daily basis.
Oh,
So
God.
now it's a cycle, and we just need to kind of assist in whatever ways we can.
So they're kicking. So has the school had any kind of training or conversations with?
As far as I know, they're not.
Where,
And that's why we're trying to get some supports where even at the school board level, that child was getting kicked out, but never even on the radar for special education services.
right.
It's not until we started advocating that then now it's kind of on the awareness. The report from the mom was, at least now they're nicer to her, where
Oh,
before they were dismissing her as a parent as well. But the situation is still occurring where the child is not getting the supports. Talking about the school, it's escalating, just in that outside environment. escalating that where the child is just so frustrated and
Well,
angry that I don't
yeah.
know what to do.
They don't want to go back. So where's the school? Where is it?
It's in the urban center of Elliott Lake.
It's Elliott Lake. Well, you know, there's, you know, I mean, there's ways to get people up in there to do things like the Kairos blanket exercise,
Yeah.
you know, and, you know, have some sessions with the school board. I think that's the next step, that there should be some education happening at the school, or maybe even, you know, Patricia, having them, you know, sending them these webinars, you know, and having a sense of what kinds of things they're, you know, because again, they're only looking at the child. They're not looking at what's behind the child. You know, what are the experiences that Indigenous kids coming into their school have actually had? And maybe that's a way to do it. But I think sometimes the Kairos blanket exercise is very useful. And I know, like, Elliott Lake is about a 6-hour drive for us, that the two of the gals that teach, like, they're certified, 2 Indigenous gals from Thunder Bay. They're coming down to Aurelia next week. They're trained to do that, and they do all they've done. I don't know how many thousands of teachers and school boards across the north, to actually help them understand what's the history here that you're looking at, because that's one of the issues I think through all of this conversation is there's a lot going on behind that student that is putting them into those kinds of situations where they're not coming into a classroom calm and ready to learn because there's too much going on, or their expectation is that something's going to happen when they get into that classroom or they get to that school. And so they're already lifting up their tension, they're lifting up their stress so that they're prepared to deal with it, or so they think. But if the teachers of the school are not educated and informed, then it's kind of, they're going to have to go, it's not going to work. So if you need to have something like that happen, I would recommend that you have a conversation with Patricia about, and the school board, about actually viewing, you know, these webinars or other kinds of things that are going to help them have a better understanding of what's going on with those students.
And do we have access to these webinars? Is it posted?
Yes, they will be posted on our COO website, and they have been 1 to 3, and the 4th one, once we're done, we'll get that posted up. But more importantly, I think what we have to look into those agreements that the First Nation has with the school boards to ensure that the services are available to our learner. I think that is going to involve a bigger conversation with other team members within COO, the education team, and I believe Patrick Lowen is the part of the provincial. He holds a provincial file. So I will I create an email and let him know the situation, and maybe we can again provide, an opportunity to try and get some information to the community, ensure that, through their agreements that they share with the local school board, that those, the learners' needs are met. And I think IFC last year provided some information sessions, and I believe those are available online. I will connect also with Rhonda Bove. Right now, the Shelley, not Fife, the education lead for the department, has since retired, and we're just waiting word to get a new individual assigned. So we'll definitely get some services and some individuals contacting you to try and, develop some solutions together. And I'm sure that, it's a great opportunity. And I always say one child at a time, right?
Well, yeah, because every child matters, right?
That's right.
Every child. So that's very, very important. And it's a big deal because it also, if it's one child, it's another child.
Mhm.
It's not just one, right? And if the more often they do it, the easier it comes for them to take that route where they just kick them out. We held a circle in Georgina. We had three boys kicked out in, I think it was October, for bringing what do you call this, BB guns into the school. and you're not allowed to bring guns. It's like, no, zero tolerance for guns in the school. And they brought the guns in, so they got kicked out. We asked the school board, we asked the school if they would let us host a circle, and they said yes. So we got the school board there, including the chair, and we were able to get those boys back in school the next day. Once they understood all of the history, and then, and the boys were willing to do the work that was necessary to satisfy the school board that they understood what they had done was wrong. And we created a video and we did all kinds of stuff around that, but it educated the board and they were willing to learn. So I think asking for that is a really important step forward. And it means that the students get an opportunity to say what they like, what they feel like about it. The teachers get an opportunity to say what they think about it, but everybody has to base it on positives while they're dealing with the negative. Right? You can't just say, everything's wrong. So it works really well. I think it's worth a shot. If nothing else will work, to do that exposure. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Cynthia, for everything you've been sharing today. I'm just typing furiously and taking some screenshots, but just nothing specific, but thinking about what Marnie said, and then looking around the table, what Patricia was referring to too, as the First Nations Lifelong Learning Table that Patrick facilitates, and I see we've got Tracy and Natasha and our IFN Debbie and Mia here on that table, and so one of the activities that or priorities were mandated is to, in the area of community and student well-being, is to develop a First Nations well-being toolkit for school boards, develop professional learning for school boards. So again, nothing deep today, but I sent Patrick a message and said, I think there's some launching points here, particularly with the graphic you showed about the different phases. And so again, I think we'll talk about that at the FNLLT potentially, and then maybe reach out to see if there's potential collaboration. Miigwech.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Yeah. And again, as I've said many times through the whole series, there's no expectation that any one group or one person or a small group of people do this. This is a nationwide initiative to reclaim, that jurisdiction and authority over education, over children, over governance, without interference from external agencies, unless it's invited. Right? If you invite it, fine. But if it's not invited, no. Sorry, I have a great big dog here. My daughter's dog. It's bigger than I am. She wants to sit on me. I'm like, oh, did you see her head? Her head's this big. Breathing away there. That's not my heavy breathing. It's the dog.
All right. Any other questions, please? Comments or concerns?
If not, you get an early afternoon.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. But okay, if there is anything, I want to say thank you. Thank you, Patricia, for thinking about, the need to provide, more resources. There's never enough resources from all kinds of directions. And we have such wonderful people working in our communities. And, and even though because of my training, I keep coming back to the realities of some of the pain that's there. I think we're doing a great job of lifting that pain and really getting to those conversations. So, there's lots of things that we could still be talking about that are, the sort of those foundations. But I think it's been a really, wonderful experience to spend time with everybody that's come to these sessions. And I wish everybody the very best as we move forward as nations. And we're getting there. And I may not happen completely in my lifetime because I'm getting kind of old, but I expect to see it continuing. So.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yes. As a team member of the education sector with the Chiefs of Ontario, I want to I want to express my gratitude to you. It's amazing. Decolonizing education and all the 4 models, and they're each and every one of them were important. You know, the calls to truth and reconciliation, the wise practice, you know, indigenizing education, facilitating the circle of learning. Your presentations were very informative, insightful, and inspiring, meaningful. Your knowledge and expertise in the field of special education, decolonizing education, has provided us with a deeper understanding of the challenges that our children, our youth face with diverse learning. You've also given us hope. There's so many ways to overcome these challenges and provide our children, our youth, with the supports that they need to succeed. Your dedication and commitment to improving the lives of our children, our youth, is truly, truly commendable and very heartfelt. We are grateful for your efforts in advocating for their rights and ensuring that they receive the opportunities for education, which is important to us all, right? That's why we're here. Jamigwech, for sharing the experiences, the insight, the strategies on how we can work together with our First Nation homelands to support our children with the diverse learning. Your presentations left a meaningful impact on us all. Reconciliation is a journey that we're all taking together, and it's important to all of us. And cycle breaking stands out really big for me. And that's, in a sense, giving me my marching orders moving forward, right? So to everybody, all our webinars, presentations, supporting documentation, the chat information, because it's important to see that they're all recorded and they will be found on our COO website. Friendly reminder to complete the evaluations. They're very short, sweet. We need to hear your feedback. I need to know what to, start working on next. So that will come in an email in the next day or so. Please be patient. And again, Jamigwech, for taking your valuable time to come together. It's really an honor to have many nations together, and I really appreciate it. And Jamigwech.
Yeah, Miigwech, everybody enjoy your long weekend. Take care. Bye.
Miigwech.
Ama pui.
Amati.
Ama.
Ana,